I think self-help is practical philosophy. What is reality? How do you know what's true? Who do you want to be? What is the good life? How do you create the life that you want? There's valuable things from both camps, and we can bring them together in a way that actually empowers people to deal with reality. Here's how I get this thought to be 10% less shitty.
Hey, Kara, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Look, you're a friend of Charlie Fusco. I said to Charlie Fusco I needed a wild, weird character for the podcast, and she said, you need Kara. And I know you've got a book coming out. We're going to be talking about that. I've got to drop this straight off the bat. You are the founder of the School of the New Feminist Thought and creator of the Feminist Self Help Society.
I am.
Now, I'm going to jump into the deep end. One, because my wife calls me her favorite Neanderthal. Mm-hmm. But in today's world, where I'm almost scared to speak to some women the way they're so powerful and I feel as though I could be eaten. Do you still see the need for feminists and for people to actually shout the cause is as strong as it was? I.e., are we getting better on understanding what equality really means?
Well, number one, I don't believe you're afraid anybody will eat you. I think you would be a big mouthful to bite off and chew. Number two, I think that we have made a lot of progress in some areas, and then in some places we're backsliding. If you look at the politics in the U.S. and the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we're losing rights, not gaining rights. So I absolutely think that the state of affairs politically and culturally, at least here in the United States, we still absolutely need feminism. But my work is really about how the way that society teaches us to think about ourselves impacts our thoughts. And that's not just for women, that's really for everyone. I happen to focus on women's mindset and on the feminist perspective. But the truth is, you heard certain messages from society about what it means to be a man, what it means to be from the place you're from, what it means to look the way that you look, what it means to be your socioeconomic class or your religion or your background. And so that's true for everyone. And my work just focuses on how that impacts women. And I would actually say, if you want the strong character statement, I don't think that there's anything other than being feminist or you can either believe that everyone is equal, which is feminism, or you can believe that one gender or sex is better than the other, which is sexism. There isn't a neutral position between those two things. It's just that feminism has gotten a bad name, so people don't want to identify with it. So I think we absolutely need it in every area. And this work is about a bigger picture than that.
You say it's got a bad name. I would probably say that most people don't understand what it is, and we don't like what we don't understand. So anything that kind of challenges us to think, we run away from. You've only got to try and have a conversation with someone about God or religion. We can talk about, and I hate to even bring this up, but we can talk about mass murder. We can talk about drive-bys. We can talk about any lyrics from any raps, and we're absolutely fine. But we start talking about God, feminism, and things, and people will switch off because they're scared to get into that conversation. And I do like the way you bring up about the education system. We're being taught from a very, very old platform of what a man and a woman is. Now, I was on a podcast a little while ago about true men, real men. And it was kind of like the very kind of, wow, a man's a man and stuff like that. That was the beginning of the podcast, but it very much got quickly into what does a man stand for? The provider, the gentleman that holds up the door of a car, things like that, and how men were losing their identity and women were becoming the stronger element. I want to ask you a direct question because it's one that's curious to me. Where do you stand on chivalry?
I don't think any of these things should be gender-based. So I think that there are people, first of all, there's many more genders than just men and women, but I talk a lot about what society teaches us, and most of society still operates on there are two, this is what they are, they're different, they marry each other, right? It's like a very heteronormative framework. And I think that there are people, I would think of it more as there are people who like to open doors and there are people who like to have doors open for them. And I think that's beautiful if they pair up, but I don't think that should be based on your gender or your sex. That just depends on, if I think about I'm engaged to a man and we have a relationship in which some things might look very traditional, like he does tend to open the car door and he does tend to do most of the driving. He takes out the trash. I make the money. He is like hangs out mostly at home. We have his kids half the week. He takes care of the kids when they're there. So it's not that, we still have we have splits that in some way would look very traditional and some way very non-traditional, but we have the freedom to make that up between us without either of us then telling ourselves like, oh, I'm not a real woman or I'm not a real man, or, customizing this relationship the way I want means something about my worth or value. That's what I want to free people from.
I like that. I like that statement a lot. Thank you very much. I've had ladies open the door for me before, and of course, I've been very grateful. And thank you very much. It's a wonderful thing. I think what's happening is over the years, as lines are getting blurred with pronouns, identity, and I will say that this is my opinion. It's your choice on what you want to identify, how you identify. Mm-hmm. I think that's your choice. I think the thing that annoys a lot of people is when it's getting pushed down our throat, and that starts getting a bit annoying, and people are being told what to think and how to conform, and it's ridiculous. I remember Dan Sullivan says, your mind polishes the past. We all like to go, oh, it was simpler back then. Mm-hmm. No, it wasn't. We've just forgot all the crap. I remember my wife used to say, oh, the music in the 80s was far better than the crap it is today, until we tune into an 80s radio station and realize it was just as terrible then as it is today. But I think there's a lot going on, and a lot of us are trying to become something that we're not, or become something that we feel we are. The lines are getting so blurred, we're getting confused, and it's getting harder to operate. How would you teach someone to actually get a bit more open-minded on people today?
So I think when people say something's being shoved down our throat, it's like you'll hear that rhetoric from both quote unquote sides. You can hear that from somebody who's a radical conservative or a radical liberal. So to me, it's less that that's really happening. And it's more that, as you were talking about earlier, when people are confronted with kind of an opinion or belief that they don't like or they don't understand, it feels almost like an assault on them. And that's actually because of how our brain operates, right? Our brain wants to feel certain about everything because it associates certainty with safety. And that's why somebody disagreeing with you, even about something that's like a conceptual issue that is not going to impact the next 20 minutes of your life in any way, can feel like very threatening and can feel like an assault. So I think that there's one way into this, and one way towards open-mindedness is to understand that the emotions or thoughts you have when someone says something you disagree with or presents an idea that you don't believe are not necessarily because you're so right and they're so wrong, right? It's actually a function of how your brain is programmed to respond to information that seems to contradict what you already believe, which our brains often find very threatening. We have, cognitive biases that make us want to be sure because that feels safe. So even just taking a minute when you are confronted with an idea you don't believe or don't agree with to notice like, oh, I feel really agitated right now. Like I feel very activated that someone is saying this thing I don't believe. Even just having that pause of, okay, the fact that that's happening isn't actually an indication that I'm in danger. This idea is wrong. This is actually a threat. It's just the way my brain's responding. And I can try to like calm myself a little bit before I engage in this conversation goes a long way.
Oh, I love that. I'm loving the answers. Like, you're a smart kiddie. It's as simple as that, because I even graduate of Yale College and Harvard Law School. You've got the brain cells, okay? And I'm loving the responses we're getting. You mentioned, or I mentioned earlier, the Feminist Self Help Society. You've got a great podcast, Unfuck Your Brain, and we want to talk about Take Back Your Brain, your book. The Feminist Self Help Society. Okay, and the School of the New. When did that start, and what was the trigger that wanted you to create it?
Yeah. So I started my coaching business and my kind of doing this work in 2016. So that's 8 years ago. I was a reproductive rights litigator and then an academic before that. And then I became a coach, as one does, normal career transition. And for a long time, I didn't actually I had my podcast, Unfuck Your Brain, and then I had the coaching I was doing. And when I started, that was fine. They weren't really cohesive in any way. When you first start anything, like a coach or being a doctor. You're sort of doing what you've been taught. You don't yet have your own depth of expertise, way of doing things, theory of things. And then as time went on, especially as I began writing and putting together this book, which is a long process, so it started like 3 years ago, I really saw that like actually, this is an entire body of work about coaching and an entire theory of how women's minds work. It's an entire theory of socialization and how that impacts our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and how the results, the returns we can get in the world. And so we actually just rebranded, sort of announced the founding of the School of New Feminist Thought in the last sort of 6 months as like a bigger picture home for this work, because I really think that's what this is. I absolutely believe that structural policy law changes, those are super important. I worked on those for 15 years of my career. But we spend so much time in most social justice movements, including the feminist movement, talking about that stuff and not nearly enough time talking about how all of those things impact the actual internal experiences women have. And this isn't, again, just for women. If any change we want to see in the world comes from the human mind. So if we are not making sure that we have kind of liberated the way we think, how are we going to ever solve the world's problems if we're just thinking the way we've been taught to think? So that is really kind of the genesis of that name and of the school.
Now, you said in there, I think you did, I picked up on the fact that it's not just for women. Can guys get involved in your programs?
We tend to offer, the programs we offer tend to be aimed at and created for people who are socialized as women, not all of whom, are women or identify as women. But I think that this work, the principles that I teach, apply far beyond women. And in my book, the whole first chapter, in fact, the first exercise asks people to go through and kind of write out all the different identities they have. So not just gender, but it might be your religion, where you're from, your body size, if you're neurodiverse or not, your ethnic background, like anything that just feels salient to you, right? For some people, like being short might be an identity. It's like whatever characteristics you have that feel salient to you. And then it has them write out, what are the messages you remember hearing from society about that? So if you think about like a way that society has an unreasonable standard for men, right? We're socialized to think that being short for a man is a detriment, that means that they're, that taller men are more attractive or more desirable. And so that obviously can have a huge impact on the thoughts that shorter men have about themselves, their bodies, their desirability, their partnership abilities, all of that. And what does society say about those people? And then you look at, what are my thoughts about myself? You start to see there's a real direct line between what you were taught about people like you and how you seem to think about yourself. And so people of any gender and people of any identity in all different areas of life can be using these practices and these tools that I teach on those identities, even though, inside the Feminist Self Help Society, we are more focused on gender-based socialization.
I'm interrupting this podcast for 35 seconds to give you more value. If you are an ambitious entrepreneur looking for the opportunity in everything you come across, don't just listen to this podcast. Imagine taking part in these conversations every week. Imagine having a new network of creative and disruptive entrepreneurs to support and push you into becoming the person you can be. With this high level and exclusive community, it exists. Head to simsdistillery.com to learn more. Would you go as far as to say that women's brains and men's brains are wired differently?
I think we are taught to think differently. And that's based on like what society perceives you as. So just as an example, like if you are a trans woman and you always knew that you were a woman, but you were assigned male at birth and people around you were treating you like you were male, you may have received a lot of like conflicting socialization that was hard to make sense of, right? You're hearing messages about what men are supposed to be like, and people are treating you like you're supposed to be like that. You're also hearing messages about what women are supposed to be like, and you think you're a woman, so you're relating to those messages in a different way. So my work is really I am not here to settle or even get involved in debates about, what genders are like, what differences between different genders are biological or not. What I'm really focused on is if we just start from what is society teaching us about ourselves, there's so much work to be done. And I do think that we get different types of messages. But it's not as though none of my work is to say like, well, men get only good messages and women get the bad ones. Patriarchy is bad for everybody. I mean, I gave that example of a man being short. Men are socialized to, my partner grew up with the socialization that like he shouldn't have emotions, essentially, right? I mean, he shouldn't access his emotions. He shouldn't be vulnerable. He shouldn't be weak. He shouldn't cry, weak, quote unquote. Like, that's horrible socialization that really messes up men's abilities to be vulnerable, to have intimate relationship, to connect to be right. And that is also socialization. So socialization fucks us all in different ways. My book is just particularly about one subset of it. This is the first book. In other books, maybe I'll be able to get to the other ones.
It was a leading question. I'm sure you realize that it's a podcast. That's why I'm asking it. But as a marketer, my goal and my aim is to get into other people's heads to understand how they see and react to those things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if brains are medically different with guys. I don't know, but how we receive, accept, consume, and then react to things, as you say, through the way that things are thrown at us by being a different gender through the years, steers the way we actually see and react to things. But it would be wise for someone that wanted to understand their partner to get involved. Now, I know my wife, she over the years, she's gone, listen to this podcast, read this book, let's watch this movie. And I've wanted to understand how it is that she sees things, because I can look at something as blue and she's looking at it and it's a dark green. And there's that kind of, I just wondered if maybe the guys being able to just take a peek in there and go, okay, what is a feminist? In fact, let's start there. Point blank, what is a feminist?
So I will just say before I'm going to answer that question, my father started reading the book and then he was like, oh, this is useful. I'm using this for myself.
Yes.
So it's not just to understand the women in your life. The way that I define a feminist is somebody who believes that people should have access to the same rights and opportunities regardless of their gender. That's it.
That's simple enough. That's it. And you say that in a lot of areas, well, I think your term was in some areas we're going forwards and in some areas we're going back. The Roe versus Wade, I'm sure you don't want to get into the politics. And I respect that.
I'm happy to, but you may not want to.
Well, I don't know. Well, let's play. I personally think the idea that someone else can have anything to do with the rights of a woman to decide what she wants to do is fucking ludicrous.
I was a reproductive rights litigator. I mean, I'm on board.
Oh, there you go. Well, that was a short argument, wasn't it?
No, it's not an argument. I mean, I always say I've been a feminist professionally my whole life. It's just I used to work on policy, law. That's why I feel so strongly about the mindset piece is I ran the Yale Women's Center and I was a clinic escort and I was, an emergency room advocate for sexual assault victims. And I was a litigator and then I did policy work and I did academia. Like I did a lot of the jobs in a social justice movement. And those are all super important. And the movement stuff is important. Policy and law change is important. And women's mental and emotional experiences and their perspective on the world are important because for any marginalized group, or any dominant group, we recreate what we believe to be true, right? We look for evidence to confirm the beliefs we already have. We act in ways that are consistent with the self-image we already have. So to me, anything you want to see changed in the world, if you're ignoring the mental and emotional capacity of the people who have to come up with the change and create it, you're just missing a huge piece of the picture. So we need both, but there's this middle ground. It feels like a lot of this, I don't know what you sort of encounter in my part of the self-help, self-development, world. It's there's a lot of, what's the right word for this? It's just sort of some of it is just very woo in a way that I don't find helpful. And then some of it is just goes to such an extreme, right? You create everything that happens to you with your thoughts, including cancer and if your partner cheats on you. It's just so extreme and ridiculous sort of. And then on the other hand, in the social justice world, it's structuralism taken too far. Nobody can do anything about their own lives. It's all these big picture economic, social, political forces. We don't have any agency. And my work is really about saying like, no, there's valuable things from both camps, and we can bring them together in a way that actually empowers people to deal with reality.
You said a line in there which I absolutely loved, that we look for evidence to confirm the beliefs we have. I really like that, but then that tends to make me feel as though, again, it's down to how much we consume and allow our head to consume the noise that's out there. Whether it be on the TV shows, the radios, politics, social media, we've got a lot of other people's opinions that can define and refine us that shouldn't. You brought up an example there about, I came from an Irish family. And so, you didn't cry, you're a man's man, my wife was never like that. I never got a lot of hugging until I met her. And it was all the kind of like, we're big and tough, and we're under that stereotype that when we try to step out and we go, hey, I want to show vulnerability, and I do cry at Bambi and stuff like this, that we're called weak.
Yeah.
And that's kind of enforced. But so there's a lot of other people's opinions that steering our response to it and upsetting us. So it is working on both sides. Now, you actually, you've got this book coming out. In fact, I believe it releases in May. Has it released yet?
May 21st.
Right. So let's hit it straight. Where can they get that book?
Can get that book anywhere books are sold, and there's a US edition, but there's also a special edition for UK, Australia, and New Zealand already. So depending on where you're located, you just go to your local bookstore or your local book website, it'll have it.
Why are there special editions? Are people in England and Australia different to America? Well, I know the ones in Australia are different.
I didn't write a specific version for them. It's just that was the foreign rights that were purchased. The UK publisher did the foreign rights very early, so the books came out at the same time. My podcast has a lot of listeners from the UK, from Australia, from New Zealand. I think at lots of places that are, I mean, there's listeners all over the world, but obviously people who are in countries where one of the dominant languages is English, we've got listeners. So
yeah, I like to poke the Australian. When I did my books, we had a big following from Australia get aboard, and we got a whole bunch of clients from Australia. So I like to have a little play with how strange, different, and weird they are actually down there. So the book came out. The name of the book is
Take Back Your Brain: How a Sexist Society Gets in Your Head and How to Get It Out.
That is an awesome title. I absolutely love that title. Now, you're a smart girl, so very quickly. Is this your first book?
This is my first book. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I had to preface that. No one gets rich from writing a book. Books don't make a fortune of money. And as you've already stated, they take a long time to come out. They can also be very wrenching as you're writing the book, because you're digging down into it. So, let's be serious. It's an uncomfortable process writing a book. So why do it?
Because there's the sole answer, which is 80% of the answer, is because I really believe that what's in the book is life-changing. I mean, I've worked with tens of thousands of women at this point, so I know I'm not the only one who believes that. And there are people who just will never listen to a podcast. That's not how they like to learn, who are not going to join a coaching program, although everyone should. So the book is really, to me, about reaching people who my other work won't reach. Is about putting it all together. As a podcaster, I mean, I'm not sure if you started with your books or started with your podcast, but I started with a podcast. So, it's like the evolution of my thought it's like a geographic layering in 350 podcast episodes. So putting it all in one place just makes it like a one-stop shop. So that I wrote the book so that if you're new to this kind of mindset thought work, you can start at the beginning. And by the end of the book, you understand your brain, you understand how society impacts your brain. You have a lot of very concrete tools to change. I mean, when you were talking about the way that we have a lot of other people's opinions in our heads, I think that's true. And I think curating our media or curating our intake isn't enough. We need to actually have the ability to change the way we think on purpose very concretely, not like good vibes only or manifestation, but like very concrete here's how I get this thought to be 10% less shitty. Like, here's how I do that again and move my way along. So the book is really designed to take you through that whole process. And if you are more familiar with these kinds of tools, the book is going to take you through kind of a much deeper excavation than you've probably done, because socialization and social messaging is not part of most coaching curriculum, leadership development, self-help work. So is 80% that, and 20%, as you say, I don't make my money from writing the book. I have a coaching program, I have a business, and this is also a way, obviously, to expose myself to new markets and to up level my kind of, standing. Because I really, one of the reasons that the Feminist Self Help Society uses the term self help is that I think what we do, I think self help is practical philosophy. And I think that's, things that are called self help tend to be associated with women. And then for men, it'll be more like leadership development, or like, it's more kind of lofty. And a lot of the questions we're asking in self help and coaching are questions that are big philosophical questions, like, what is reality? How do you know what's true? Who do you want to be? What is the good life? How do you create the life that you want? I mean, Plato and Socrates were talking about these things too. They're not kind of flighty questions. They're the most important questions you can ask yourself. And I think women and all marginalized people have always had to help ourselves and help each other. So I'm very proud to be in that self-help shelf, but I think everybody should be shopping from that shelf.
Yeah, you say about Socrates, these are great questions that should be asked often. Me and my wife, we actually sit down every now and then, and we'll even table it for like 6 months' time. We're going to have this conversation, and we'll ask those questions. Who are we? Are we the person that we'd be proud to meet if we were 10 years older? All that kind of stuff. So, those are good questions to make sure that you keep the ship steered straight. The book's out. Are you doing an audio version of it?
Yes, I read the audio version myself. So Good. If you like the sounds of these dulcet tones, they are on your audiobook as we speak.
All right, good. I always like it when an author actually does their own audio. I find that too many people don't, and I think people are getting turned off by it, because it's not them. If I read your book, it wouldn't be the same. So, you're talking about feminism. The daft thing is, when you were talking about the media consumption, how your head reacts, you could have taken the label of feminism away from it and put it into actually any identifier. It's simply how you've got to alter the algorithms. It's a case of you're looking at Instagram, all of a sudden, one of the suggestions is a street fight. And you go, oh, God, that's horrible, that's graphic, I don't want to see that. But because you did, the following day, that's what the algorithms populate your feed with. And now all you think is the planet is actually fighting. And you've got to force yourself. You were saying about self-help, okay? I love self-help because you're working on you. The only damn good asset you've got, you. And you're trying to make it better. I hate manifestation. Maybe I misunderstand it, but this whole kind of manifest your thing, that's like, hope being your best marketing strategy. So that as much as the guys can sometimes go too far with the rah, let's like, pretend we're Navy SEALs for a weekend and that'll change everything. You've also got the manifestation, thinking it will be real woo-woo shit that I've seen from the feminist side, or not the feminist, the female side. Do you have an opinion on that, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not here's what I think. When what we call manifestation, quote unquote, works, it works because you practiced a new belief that impacted how you feel and how you act, and that produced new outcomes. So I think that thought change is the first and crucial step. I mean, if all we needed to do was just have someone tell us what we should do to get an outcome, none of us would have jobs here, because you could just upload to the internet, like, here's the 10 steps to work out. Here's the 10 steps to build a business. Like, it's obviously not just reading the action. It's just not just knowing the actions, right? It's like, what is your thinking? What is your feeling? How are you coming to them? If your thought is, what I have is invaluable, no one's going to want it, it doesn't matter if you follow a 10-point marketing plan. Like, the way that you show up is not going to sell anything. So I do not call and I don't believe in manifestation in the sense of like, you can just will it into being with your thoughts. But I do believe when you change the way you think, it impacts obviously how you feel, how you show up in the world, how you act. And then you get some evidence that your thought was, oh, if I believe this is valuable, what I'm offering, and I talk about it like it's valuable, then other people want it, that I've proven to myself it's a little bit valuable. And then we get like a positive cycle.
I love that. Where can people follow you?
You can find me at the schoolofnewfeministthought.com. I am at Kara Loewentheil everywhere. There's only like 10 people with my last name, so it's very easy to find me. But honestly, the easiest thing to remember and go to probably is just takebackyourbrainbook.com, and you will find links to everything there. My last name is hard to spell, so if you try, no saying where you'll go.
Kara, thanks for coming on the show today. Thanks for being feisty and just calling it as it is. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best with the book. Keep doing what you're doing. And again, thanks for being a guest on the Art of Making Things Happen podcast.
Thanks for having me. Anywhere I'm allowed to be feisty is a fun place to be.
See you later. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. You know what to do. If you love it, share, subscribe, but more than anything, do something with it. And remember, life's too short to play it safe. So disrupt, connect, and grow. See you next time.